My scary stories are real. And of course, I'm from Savannah, Georgia, and the Marsh House is haunted. The dynamic of relationships between the antebellum period were very complex and often fraught in power of imbalance and exploitation. They say that the Marsh House was built on a graveyard, like most of like the buildings and landmarks in most of the city. Francis Sorrell was a wealthy Savannian that stayed in the Marsh House and who was married to Matilda Sorrell, in which they both had a very beautiful family. Francis Sorrell was a handsome, distinguished gentleman, and he could get anything he wanted. And all the slave women knew that if Francis wanted it, Francis was going to get it. So, Francis meets this young slave girl by the name of Molly, and he falls madly in love with her bold features. And it was something about Molly that he was very intrigued with. And Francis Soul will find himself in the part of the house where Molly was cleaning. And one day, the expectations was too much, so he decided that he wanted to kiss Molly. And he became passionate with her. And every day the missus left the house, him and Francis would find themselves in passion. Though Molly knew the consequences of her action, she didn't have any will. So every night, Francis' wife slept. He creeped to where Molly was. Francis was an distinguished gentleman. Everybody knew his infidelity with Matilda. And they also knew that he had a certain type of fetish for black women. So now the rumors are circulating through Savannah. Some legends, despite the wives' reaction, with anger, jealousy, and sorrow. One day, Matilda came home from her runs early, and she caught her husband around Molly. She sensed something was off. Francis takes her and they walk off and leave Molly to doing her job. But Matilda had heard about how some of the men were fraternizing with their slaves. And the love that she had for Francis Sawyer and their family, she didn't want to be one of those ones who husband messed with the help. It was beneath her. And she knew that her husband wouldn't embarrass her like that. So one night, As she slept, Francis get up and he goes to where Molly's at. But this time, Matilda is not asleep. So she give it some time and she creeps down after her husband. And she can hear him moaning, having sex with Molly. She stood from the door. Her heart started pounding. She didn't know what to do. She ran back to the room. Matilda knew that she couldn't confront her husband. She didn't have enough courage to even walk on them in the act. Molly started to become ill at work. And one of the elders walked up and says to her, "You got a baby growing in your stomach." Molly's so full of joy. Her first seed, her first baby. Over time, Molly's stomach started to get bigger, and she started to feel her baby in her stomach. Word around Savannah that Francis got that young girl pregnant. Now, Matilda is the talk of the city. She's hurt. She's embarrassed and betrayed. Runs to Francis. "How can you do this to us? How can you do this with our family? You go out and you screwing to help, and you got her pregnant?" So Francis looks at Matilda and tells her to calm down. That is not what she thinks. And this made Matilda furious. Matilda looked her husband in his eyes and she says, "Do you love her? Do you love her?" With tears rolling down her face, Frances looks away. She goes to the kitchen where Molly is cleaning. She tells the other slave women to leave them alone. She looks at Molly, trying to figure out what her husband saw in her. She looked down and she noticed that Molly's baby bump was getting bigger. Matilda looked away, grabbed the knife off the counter, swung it at Molly, splitting her throat. Molly hits the floor. The other slaves rushed in screaming as Matilda rushed upstairs and barricade herself in the room. She goes to the dresser and smashes the portraits of her and Francis. Crying in agony, she opens up the window. Francis and the slaves try to get in the room. When they rushed in, Matilda had already threw herself off the balcony from the second floor of the Marshall House. Today, they say that her ghost can be seen floating through the hotel. My scary stories are real.